have a very interesting subject. The title of our study today is Judgment, the Happiness Killer. Now, it all makes sense in a little bit, but the Sermon on the Mount is found in the book of Matthew, chapter 5. And this is Jesus's inaugural address, sort of as the kingdom of heaven. And in that inaugural address, Jesus states some of the most powerful and thought-provoking truths in the entire Bible. And here's the interesting thing. After 9/11, on Larry King Live, there was a panel of religious leaders from various faiths. And a Hindu priest, he said this. He said that the Sermon on the Mount was one of the greatest writings ever written in the history of mankind. Now, why would a non-Christian Hindu priest say that about a speech given by Jesus in a Christian holy book? Because to put it simply, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you're an adherent to a religious faith or whether you're an atheist, the science behind what Jesus spoke in the Sermon on the Mount is pretty much incontrovertible. From a purely psychological perspective, the principles that are taught within the Sermon on the Mount are really the secrets to happiness. And if you take the time to break down the Sermon on the Mount as I have, what you'll see is that each of these principles will ultimately fulfill our happiness if kept, or kill our happiness if we reject them. So there's a very powerful book that I just read. A friend of mine recommended it to me, and it's by Dr. James B. Richards. It's entitled How to Stop the Pain. Here's the book right here. This is a fantastic book, and I highly recommend this book. And it highlights what we're talking about in a very powerful way. What attracted me, in fact, to the book was the subtitle, because the subtitle reads, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional." And when I read that, I saw that and I was like, okay, you've got me. Because how much truth is in that title alone? And why is that? Because, everyone suffers pain. That's inevitable. That's something that we can't avoid. That's a fact of life. Jesus said in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, something that I really like, because he's talking about the last days, which I believe we're living in. And he says in verse 12, he says, "And because of iniquity," or sin, "because iniquity shall abound, the love of many would wax cold," or would grow cold. And I believe that we're living in that time. And all you have to do is look around to see how cold and heartless people have become in this world. And, even at the best of times, avoiding pain is near impossible. So in a time like this, the one thing that you can definitely expect is that we will encounter pain on some level, whether it is as a result of our own poor choices or whether we're the innocent victim of somebody else's behavior and poor choices. In fact, another verse that I like that Jesus said, he said in Luke 17:1, he said, "It is impossible, but that offenses will come." In other words, the bottom line is this: pain is inevitable. But suffering, what about suffering? Suffering as in long-term suffering as a result of the pain, that's optional. That is totally optional. But here's what Dr. James B. Richards says in his book, How to Stop the Pain. He says, "Most people have never acquired the tools necessary for resolving personal hurt. As a result, hurt grows into bitterness, sorrow, depression, and eventual loss of physical health. Our future becomes controlled by the past that has locked us into an unending cycle of more hurt and disappointment." Is that true? How many people know exactly what to do when they encounter pain? How many people know how to cope with pain? Or how many people turn to self-destructive means to stop the pain instead of really truly resolving that personal hurt? The reality, though, is this: we don't simply have to let life happen to us Dr. Richards suggests, he says, we have no control over the fact that pain will come, but we do have complete control over that pain's ability to turn into suffering. We can end the cycle of hurt with incredible ease. We can avoid bitterness and the need for vengeance. We can free ourselves from the pain of the past. We can even change our future. At the end of sort of the introductory chapter, he says this. He asked this question. He says, do you want to be free from pain and suffering? And I would ask you all to ask yourselves that same question. Do you want to be free from pain and suffering? I think that's kind of a rhetorical question, because most people, unless they're just some sort of sick sadist, really, don't want to be in pain if they are. So he says, let this book take you on a journey toward freedom from pain. The first step on this journey requires that you surrender the right to judge. And then he goes on and he says, this will be one of the most challenging steps you'll ever take. It'll also be one of the most rewarding. And he says that he's put together these principles that would help people develop the tools to walk away from the suffering that results from the pain that inevitably comes into our lives. So you can imagine, like, when I'm reading this book, right? I'm at the end of this introductory chapter, and I'm chomping at the bit, dying to know what in the world is this secret sauce that he's talking about to avoid the suffering that often seems to follow pain and personal hurt. And you'll be surprised to find out what he says is one of the key ingredients, because I get to chapter 2, and the title is, What is Judgment? And I was really a little confused, and I'm like, okay, like, where is he going with this? And Dr. Richards, he then quotes the Sermon on the Mount, specifically Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. And he says, judge not that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this, and I'm like, okay, so I'm looking for a secret to ending the suffering, or avoiding the suffering that comes along with the inevitable pains and hurts that we'll experience in life. And you're talking about judgment. Like, what does this have to do with the other? But I kept reading, because, I have this personal principle of mine that I never throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Even if it seems like it doesn't make sense, I'll at least entertain an idea. So I keep reading, and he says that one of the most critical factors for emotional health and happiness is what Jesus just said in Matthew chapter 7, which is not to judge. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So he's saying not judging people is one of the most critical factors to health and happiness. So the converse idea would be that judging people would lead to unhappiness and a lack of health. So he's saying essentially that judgment is the happiness killer. And that's where I got my title from. And for centuries, he says, we have missed the meaning and scope of this simple yet powerful passage. We have interpreted these verses as to say, if you judge other people, God is going to judge me. But that's really not what the passage says. It says that if we judge people, people will judge us. Now, you can imagine at this point, I'm super excited to find out this secret to stopping the pain, or choosing to end or even avoid suffering altogether. And this guy is talking about judgment. But I keep reading, right? I keep reading. And pretty quickly in the next couple of pages, he says something that really resonated with me. He says, the quality of our emotional life is found in the quality of our relationships. We are social, emotional, and relationship-oriented beings. We thrive on meaningful relationships. It is one of the deepest needs that we have as human beings. And even though our judgments influence those relationships more than any other factor, few people even know what it means to judge. And then he asks a question. He says, so what does it mean to judge? And then he goes on, he says, although judging has many facets, I believe that we all can grasp the most basic and essential aspect, which is this. Now listen up. He says, identifying what someone did is not judging. Okay? Identifying what somebody did is not judging. That is merely observation. So you know how sometimes somebody's doing something that is unhealthy, and you sort of point something out and they say, don't judge me. Just identifying what they're doing is not judgment. That's observation. Those two are different. There's a difference between judgment and observation. The problem is when we assume to know why a person did what he or she did, that is when we've entered into judgment. Right? Did you hear what he says? When we assume to know why a person did what they did, that's when we've entered into judgment. Now, how many of us do that? Let's be honest. How many of us do that? Something happens, something hurts us, or something that we don't like happens, and we instantly assume to know everything about why that person did what they did and what they meant to do by doing it. Now I'll give you an example. This might hit a little close to home for some. You have a husband who's on the couch and he's watching the game. It's the fourth quarter of the Warriors game, and it's the playoffs, right? And the wife, it needs some help in the kitchen. She doesn't understand that he's really tuned into this game, and he doesn't understand that she needs help, right? So she starts, you know what the ladies do, right? They start and huffing and puffing, right? To kind of send those signals, hoping that you'll hear, you don't get it. Then they start slamming doors, the cabinet doors open and shut, hoping that you'll get it. But you're tuned into the game, so you're completely oblivious to what's happening, right? And so all of a sudden, the game's over. Husband finally notices that the wife is mad and says, hey, are you okay? I'm fine. Right? Isn't that what they say? And they said, well, you look upset. Well, what's wrong? Nothing. Right? And they say, no, come on, something's wrong. And then they turn around and explode on you. You saw me here. I was cleaning and you didn't even bother to help. And all you cared about was your stupid game. And you did that because you don't love me and you don't want to help. And all of a sudden, the husband's like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't realize what was going on. I wasn't even paying attention. I was just watching the game. So what happened in that situation? The wife really didn't communicate that she needed help. The husband was oblivious to what was going on, and he sort of ignored the fact that she was cleaning. And all of a sudden, she became upset because she felt like he should have known. And if he really loved her, he would see. That's called judgment. Now, what happens? So she judged him, and all of a sudden she's angry and upset, and now there's conflict. Now he could turn that around and judge her by saying, you know what, you're always nagging at me, and it's because you never think I'm good enough. Now he's judging her. So what happens? Now you got two people who could have had a beautiful night and just enjoyed their evening, but now they're fighting because they're both judging each other, right? When we assume to know why a person did what they did, we've entered into judgment. And, one thing that, we have to understand is that there's no way that we can know why somebody does something. And so when we assume to know why, our reactions aren't based on reality, as Dr. Richards puts it. He says they are based on judgment. And then he says this, he says that judgment causes pain, confusion, and loss. Let me say that again. The judgment causes pain, confusion, and loss. So in the example that I just gave you, of the wife judging the husband, now she's feeling upset. She's in pain. She's feeling hurt. Now he's feeling upset because he's feeling judged. He's feeling like he doesn't measure up, and he's accusing her of looking at him as if he's not good enough. And all of a sudden you have conflict. And eventually, if that conflict is not resolved by understanding and some steps that are taken by each party, that could end up leading in, one, a miserable marriage, or two, a divorce. And how many divorces have we seen or maybe experienced ourselves that could have been avoided by simply not doing these things? Think about it. How many of us have lost friendships, marriages, jobs? How many don't talk to family members, all because we couldn't stop judging each other? How many of us stopped going to church because a pastor or a church member said something that we didn't like, and we turned on our heels, walked out, and never came back? All of this could have been avoided by simply making the choice not to judge the motives of the other person or assume. Here's what Dr. Richards says in his book, How to Stop the Pain. He says, the moment you attempt to determine why another is doing what he or she is doing, you have given it significance. Keep in mind that nothing has power to hurt us until you attach significance to it. Another person's actions are only as significant to you as the judgments you pass on them. The judgment you make is based on your decision about why that person did what he did. Did you see that? The degree of pain or insult that you experience from the actions of another is based solely on the judgment you pass. Let me say that again. The degree of pain or insult you experience from the actions of another is based solely on the judgment you pass. And the judgment you pass is your assumption of why he did what he did. So the minute you start saying, oh, so-and-so did that because this, now you entered into judgment. Now you're on the road to pain, confusion, and loss. You see, pain is inevitable. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. How does suffering begin? When we attach significance to an action by assuming that a person meant to do a certain thing, or assuming that you know what their motives were. Now you're upset because you're insulted, you're hurt, or whatever. Neglect, feeling rejected, neglected, who knows? He goes on and he says, passing judgment causes us to react to situations inappropriately. Okay, so let's go back to my example of the husband and wife. Was the wife's reaction appropriate in that particular situation? There's a wife out there right now going, absolutely, but I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to disagree with you. That was not the appropriate reaction, right? First of all, she could have communicated verbally what she wanted, and the husband could have said, oh, sweetie, you know what? Can we do this as soon as the game is over? There's 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It'll be done. And as soon as it's done, I'll help you. And boom, all that could have been avoided, right? But she passed judgment instead, and it caused her to react inappropriately and become angry. And then he passed judgment on her, assuming that the reason why she was picking at him and nagging at him was because she felt he didn't measure up. And now he's yelling at her. And now you've got this combustible reaction of two people judging each other when all that could have been avoided. He goes on, Dr. Richards says, the combination of our judgments and unacceptable behavior then begins the cycle of sowing and reaping. People heap judgment back on us because of the judgment we have sown into their lives. Simply giving up the right to judge would break the cycle of pain and torment while salvaging many valuable relationships. You see that? You see that? Just giving up the right to judge, just saying, you know what, I have no right to judge. I don't know why this person did that, but I'm not going to judge. Just that right there could break the cycle of pain and torment while salvaging many valuable relationships, right? Another part in another chapter, he says, it is impossible for the majority of our pain. It seems impossible for the majority of our pain to be the product of judgment rather than the events. So, you know, a lot of us, we look at our pain and we, you know, we say, no, the reason why I'm hurting is because of this thing, because this is what happened to me. But really what Dr. Richards is saying in his book, How to Stop the Pain, is no, that's actually not it. The majority of your pain comes from your judgment of the situation, right? If a husband cheats on a wife or a wife cheats on a husband, right? And the wife determines that the reason why the husband did that is because he never loved her and he's evil and he's a horrible monster, or vice versa. The wife is a horrible monster or whatever. Now all of a sudden that pain is exacerbated 100-fold simply because of the judgment that the injured spouse places on the offending spouse, right? And what we have to realize is that the event is painful enough, but we can get over it. But when we attach judgment to that event, now it's game over. He continues and he says, we are so sure that the wrongs that we have suffered have imprisoned us in a life of pain. But the truth is that accepting this reality, that our judgments produce our pain, is the only way out of a lifelong maze of torment. Did you hear that? Our judgments, right? Our judgments produce our pain. And accepting that reality is the only way out of a maze of lifelong torments. Because, you know, he makes this point. He says that nothing that happens outside of us in the world, whether it's in interpersonal relationships or whatever, has the power to hurt us until we judge it. And it's only when we judge something that does that it begins to bear significance in our lives. He says it another way. He says, when people do something, you judge why they did it. You decide what their motive was, and once you judge the motive, you give it significance. You give the event significance or power. And then he goes on and he says, it is true that some events have power to bring momentary emotional pain. However, in order for something to become an abiding torment, we must first attach significance to it. So what did he say? He says, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional, right? An abiding torment, something that just is with us, just this chronic pain that turns into anxiety and depression, and it just colors our entire life. We can never be truly happy for too long, because eventually the thought of that thing will be triggered by something or someone, and it'll creep back into our lives because it's an abiding torment. Some people have carried an abiding torment for 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years in some cases. Sometimes the people that hurt them aren't even living anymore, but the pain is still living in them because they've attached some significance to that and they've judged that event. And this significance takes a single event and turns it into a life of misery and suffering. Is that what we really want? Is that what we really, really want in our lives? So here's the thing. I don't ever like to bring things up without offering solutions. I'm sure some people have experienced this, and there's a way to remedy this, okay? So let's look at a few ideas about how to remedy this. The first thing is, stop being so self-centered. And you're saying, what are you talking about? Stop being so self-centered. You heard what I said. You have to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you. You're not that important to everyone, and everything everyone does is not a slight or offense meant to hurt us. Here's the thing. When somebody does something, instead of immediately going into judgment mode and assuming what they meant with those words or with that action or what they were trying to do, what their motive was, and then attaching this significance to the event and then becoming angry and heading down that path toward misery and having an abiding torment. If you really need to talk to somebody, you can simply say, instead of saying, I know why you did this, because that's judgment, right? You can simply say, as Dr. James Richards says, he says, this is what you just did, right? And this is the effect that it had on me. Nothing more, nothing less. Did you hear that? This is what you just did, and this is the effect that it had on me. No, you did this because you've never did this, or you this, and I know why you're a bad person, and none of that. Just bring it up and say, hey, here's what you just did, and here's how it made me feel, or here's how I felt as a result of this thing. This is what you did. This is the effect that it had on me. Nothing more, nothing less. We cannot attach significance. We cannot use that action to judge what kind of person he or she is. We cannot tell the person that, or we can tell the person, hey, you've kind of done this thing, more than once, or you've done it often, but you can't judge the motive or the intent. Because as soon as you do that, you're getting into dangerous waters. We simply say, this is what you've done and this is how it affected me. And you know what the crazy part about it is? Most people are surprised when they learn the effects that their actions have on you, right? Most people, you'll tell them, hey, here's what, you did and here's how it affected me. Most people, when they learn how their behavior is affecting us, they're going to be like, wow, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know. I didn't realize that this would hurt you this way. I didn't realize that this was having this effect on you. I'm sorry, but it depends on how you present it to them. If you present it to them when you're angry, when you're hurt, and you're blowing up, and you're yelling, and you're judging, and you're saying you did this and you meant to do this, then the argument is no longer, then the person is no longer hearing what you're having to say with an open heart. Now the person is going into defense mode and saying, no, that's not what I meant. No, you're assuming that's what, but that's not what I meant at all. I had no intention of hurting you or doing this. Now nobody's hearing each other. That person is defensive, so they're not hearing your pain and how their actions affected you. And you're judging, so you're not hearing that person didn't actually mean to hurt you and maybe made a poor choice or was maybe being a little self-centered and not thinking about the ramifications of their actions. Most of the time, if you come to a person and you just simply say, this is what you did, and this is the effect that it had on me, most people will be very surprised to learn the effects of their actions. But, sometimes what we'll find is also what our next step is. We go and we have a conversation about something, and we find, not only do we have to stop being so self-centered and thinking that everybody is out to get us, but the second thing that we'll find is that sometimes you just need to stop being so darn sensitive, right? Stop being overly sensitive. Sometimes we go and we confront others and we bring up an issue or something that occurred, and we realize that we're just been a little too touchy, right? In other words, there was no reason why the action should have hurt us. I'll give you an example. I am very into exercise, right? I am very into working out. It's important to me because I want to, this side of eternity, I believe that, we only get one body until, Jesus comes, and I want to take care of this body. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian, you should want to take care of your machine, your body. So I'm big time into exercise and eating right and things like that. And also it doesn't hurt when one of the side effects of exercise is that you don't look bad. So I'm big into exercise. And I was talking to a few people, and there were two women there. And I was like, oh man, yeah, I love to exercise. And I was like, yeah, we should all, everybody should exercise. Yeah, like you guys, you really should start working out regularly. It's just so good for you. It really, and I was talking about the effects that it has on your mood and your spirit when you get those endorphins kicking. And, it really does help make you feel better mentally and emotionally. But what did they hear, right? Later on, I talked to one of the women, and she said, not the two that were offended, but she said, when you were talking about everybody exercising, they got really upset. And after you left, they said that you were basically calling them fat, and that you were saying that because they were overweight. And that was the furthest thing from my mind. I was simply just being me, talking about how awesome exercise is and how it really helps you with your emotions and being happy and this and that. But they judged my words and my motive and my intent, when in actuality, they were just being a little too touchy and too sensitive. And all that, all that judgment could have been avoided if they would have just not been so overly sensitive. And if they would have brought that up to me, I could have said, oh no, that's not what I mean. I'm sorry. Like I didn't mean that at all. Like I was just saying, that it really helps you with emotions and things like that. I think you misunderstood what I was trying to say. But they didn't do that. Right. So now they got hurt, they got offended, they got upset, they got insulted, and they walked away having bad feelings towards me instead of, you know, hearing some, sound advice and maybe applying it to their lives or whatever. So it's just, when we, when we are not so easily, some of us are like exposed nerves, right? Some of us are so easily offended. I mean, this is the society that we live in nowadays, right? We live in a society full of individuals who are so easily offended that it's even hard to communicate around them. But before, you get offended and something becomes, torment for you, and something that you carry with you, and all these negative feelings that you have, all you have to do is stop judging. And then our third point is overcoming the need to judge. Here's what Dr. Richardson said. He says, to give up judgment, this is on page 96. He says, to give up judgment, we must learn an entirely new system of emotional navigation. When we start out on this new journey, we have no idea how much we've been living out of our judgment. Every day, we are faced with hundreds of times when we judge people and then act on those judgments. It is amazing how often, listen to this, it is amazing how often we assume to know why someone does something. Crazy, right? He says, do you want to be wise? Deal with only the facts, right? The moment you stop dealing with facts, you are headed towards trouble. You see, our assumptions concerning the motives of others are deadly, both for them and us. All we can know about anybody is what is observable, and that is what we see or what that person tells us, right? The Bible is interesting because it talks about observing the fruit, right? By their fruits ye shall know them. It tells us to observe the fruit, but it doesn't say that we should take the next step and then judge why the person is bringing forth the fruit. So that's where we go a little bit too far. The moment we judge why people do something, instead of dealing with what they did, we cross that line into judgment. And that's where things get tricky, and that's where things get dangerous, And we have to remember also that if we're not ready to confront in love, then we're not ready to confront at all, right? In in a healthy confrontation, when we're having a discussion with someone about something that they did, all we're going to do is we're going to reveal to people the effect of their actions. We can point out what they did, we can inform them how that makes us feel, but we can never make what we're doing an assessment of their character, and we can't pass judgment. That's really where a lot of our problems come from. It's funny because I just mentioned that, if you're going to confront somebody, we need to do it in a spirit of love, right? And what that means is you're bringing this to this person's attention because you love them and you want them to recognize that perhaps they're doing something that they might not be aware of. Maybe they have a blind spot. We all have blind spots, right? Sometimes I joke, and sometimes my joking, may be a little harsh or something, and somebody will bring that to my attention, and I'll go, okay, wow, I'll try to do better. But if we love that person, we're going to do it for them also, as well as for ourselves. But the biggest thing that we need to understand is that we need to have compassion, right? So when somebody does something, we need to understand that even if it's harmful to us, even if it hurts us, we need to understand that they may not be doing it because they don't love us, because they hate us, or whatever. It may be for some reason that we don't understand. Maybe it's something from their past. Maybe they're dealing with something. But just having compassion on people is very, very important. There is a particular pastor, very prominent pastor. I'm sure if I mention, many of you might know who this individual is. But this individual likes to go onto social media and cast judgment on people in this individual's church who are conservative and or Trump supporters, and likes to assume that these people might be racist or that they're supporting white supremacy or whatever. And I know this not because I'm passing judgment, because this individual has said as much on social media. And I've tried to point out, these people need Jesus too. Republicans need Jesus too. Trump supporters need Jesus too. If we're attacking them, we're not coming at them with a spirit of compassion, right? Instead of saying you're all bad people because you believe this, perhaps we can sit down and say, hey, I don't agree with this position that you have or this thought. Can you explain to me why you feel this way? Now we've entered into the realm of compassion because we're attempting to understand. And what we'll often find is that we have more in common than we don't. And we can only have that discussion and come to that conclusion if we don't judge, And, the thing is that a lot of times, it's really hard for people to minister to others unless they're willing to do so without judging them. But if you start judging people, what you do is you shut them down and they don't want to hear anything you have to say. And it might be the most important salvational truth ever, but they will not hear it because they're already feeling judged. And that's a problem. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she wrote a book called On Death and Dying. And she wrote a lot about people who are dealing with death. And she talked about the 5 stages of grief and things like that. She says something that I will always carry with me. It's very poignant. She said, the most beautiful people we've known are those that have known defeat. They have known suffering. They've known struggle. They've known loss and have found their way out of the depths. These people have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Let me say that again. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. You know why? Because these people have been through some things. They've made their mistakes. They've hurt others. And they've realized that we're all flawed. We're all fallible. And because they realize that, they don't see themselves as holier than thou. When they look at others, they look at them with compassion and gentleness and a deep loving concern. And when they have to talk to them about something, they come at them and they talk to them in a spirit of love, not judgment. You see, the reason why these people are so beautiful is because they have stopped judging others. When we stop judging others, that is when we will enter into a happiness and peace that some of us may have never known in our lives. Because the bottom line is this: judgment is the happiness killer. And if we can stop doing that, then we can start living a life that's free of pain, that's free of judgment, and that is free of the abiding torments that many people carry with them. So whether you're an atheist or a Christian, these words that were spoken by Jesus, just looking at the psychology and the science, are just incontrovertible. And I really do hope, it's my hope for you, that you all make the decision to begin the process of letting go of the need to judge others, so that you yourself can be happier and have better and more fruitful relationships. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk today. I look forward to talking to you guys again. And this is kind of a deep subject, so we might embark on another part of this journey again. But book is How to Stop the Pain by Dr. James B. Richards, and I highly recommend it. Hope you guys enjoy. Take care.